Hello.
Hi, Sarah. Um, Sarah Banville is a second-year PhD scholarship student at the Department of Sport and Exercise Science at Waterford Institute of Technology, WIT, in Ireland. Her undergraduate degree was a Bachelor of Business and Recreation, a Bachelor of Business in Recreation and Sport Management, and this degree was also completed at WIT. Sport has always been her passion, so naturally she decided to study both business and sport. Sarah believes that the business of sport is an integral part of the cogwheel in the industry of sport, and thus her progression to study sports and sports governments was only natural. Her presentation title is Sports Governments in Ireland, What Does It Look Like? Sarah?
Hi everyone, it's lovely to meet you all. I hope you're all keeping well in the challenging times we find ourselves in. Well done to everyone who presented so far. You've really done a great job. So, sports governance in Ireland, what does it look like? Well, this is maybe what it used to look like. Some technical difficulties. Can you see the next slide? No?
Not yet.
Oh, so this is perhaps what it used to look like. So this is a quote that stuck with me from a key informant interview that I conducted earlier this year, which I'll talk more about later in the presentation. So, old men in blazers fighting about the same thing. So the culture of sport, as I said, perhaps used to look like this, where the old guys in the blazers were making all the key decisions and nobody was asking any questions. Have we moved on from this? Absolutely. But culture can be a difficult thing to change. The residue of these types of situations can have a lasting effect. I just wanted to plant that seed in your head and perhaps some food for thought for you guys. So just for some context, it's necessary to define what governance is. So governance is the structure and the process that an organisation uses to develop its strategic goals and direction, to monitor its performance against these goals, and it's also necessary to ensure that the board of an organisation is acting in the best interests of its members. To have what is known as good sports governance then, the structures, policies and practices that an organisation develops and implements must promote values such as democracy, accountability, transparency and the inclusion of stakeholders. Unfortunately, we've not always promoted these values in Ireland, and there have been a couple of sports governance failures that have really rocked the ship here in Ireland. So I'm going to give you an example of some of these failures, one of which was when the former president of the Olympic Federation of Ireland, as it's known now, was arrested at the Rio Olympics in 2016. Pat was accused of ticket touting, of the formation of a cartel and for illicit marketing. He was arrested and detained in Rio for 5 months and faced a number of years in prison for the accusations. Pat was in his 70s and he was eventually allowed home to Ireland under medical grounds when the Association of National Olympic Committees paid his bail, which was €410,000 at the time. Pat stepped down, but he also resigned a year later. Moving on to a more recent study, recent scandal is about the Football Association of Ireland. So recently the FAI have been going through a turbulent time as they've been displaying finances that were completely false for a number of years. They were in fact in serious debt, almost €60 million in current liabilities, and they never declared the situation to Sport Ireland or the Government of Ireland, which they are obliged to do so. Instead, they covered it up and stated that they were in fact in a surplus every year. They were also paying their CEO's rent for a number of years, while at the same time they were cutting the salaries of staff who were working on the ground. Clear displays of corruption in the first case that I showed you, and in the second case, unfairness really, lack of transparency, accountability and overall bad governance. So as a result of some of the sports governance failures here in Ireland, in 2018, Sport Ireland adopted what is known as the CVC code from the charities sector in Ireland. CVC stands for Community, Voluntary and Charitable Organisations. So all national governing bodies of sport, also known as national sports organisations, and local sports partnerships, these are organisations that were developed to promote localised sporting opportunities in Ireland, were obliged to comply with this code over a 3-year period starting in 2018. Non-compliance with the code by the end of the year in 2021 will result in the organisations losing their funding from Sport Ireland and the government. The adoption of this code was completely necessary, and it was a great step in ensuring improved sports governance standards here in Ireland. Unfortunately, there were predefined problems that had the opportunity to inhibit the organisation's full compliance with the code. These problems were the operational culture and climate of the sports organisations in Ireland, the structure, scale and size of the organisations, and also a lack of available resources to some organisations. So I developed a study that examines the issues, challenges, progress and supports experienced by national governing bodies of sport and local sports partnerships on their journey to compliance with the CBC governance code, the main remit being the issues and the challenges that the organisations felt. So I thought it was necessary to identify information on the culture and context of sports governance in Ireland, and I thought it was also necessary to find out exactly what Sport Ireland wants from the organisations in terms of governance. So I conducted 2 key informant interviews earlier this year with the relevant representatives from Sport Ireland. After this, I developed a survey and asked all the national governing bodies of sport and the local sports partnerships to complete it, and I got a response rate here of 45 organisations. So what did I find? Well, I found, in terms of the issues and challenges, the respondents stated that the resources provided to them were insufficient. This was half of the organisations stated this. They felt like they had a lack of skills, knowledge and expertise which were needed to comply with this code. They felt work overload on the journey to compliance, and as we predicted, the structure, scale and size of sports organisations was also an inhibitor. Staying with the resources then, so what did the organisations want in terms of resources? Well, they wanted more specifics. They wanted an actual idea of how to set out the governance code within their organisations. More specifics on what exactly is needed and by when. More practical support. And they also wanted more specific HR funding, and that is needed over the 2 to 3 year period that it takes to become compliant with this code. What was interesting about the resources was that when I conducted my key informant interviews earlier this year, Sport Ireland were of the opinion that they have in fact provided more than enough resources to the organisations to help them become sports governance compliant with the CBC governance code. Clearly, a difference of opinion here between the organisations and Sport Ireland. So we've covered the issues and challenges and the resources, but there were in fact a number of benefits as well that the organisations experienced on their journey to compliance, some of which you can see here on the screen. As well as this, the organisations stated that they had a better understanding of the organisation's business operations and risks. They were more aware of the organisation's strategic direction, and they were also able to assure their stakeholders that their organisation was run well. So what? So what do we actually learn from this research? Well, the first thing we learn is that the issues and challenges found in the study need to be addressed before the end of 2021 next year to help the organisations become compliant, achieve the standards set out, and to keep their funding for the following year. The second thing we learn is that state intervention is in fact needed to improve sports governance standards, and improving the standards can be done using the method used here in Ireland, as you can see by the benefits identified in this study. Clearly, the organisations would not have been able to achieve equivalent standards of governance such as the CBC code because they lacked the resources, expertise and knowledge to do so. Even with the code as a base, they felt there's still a need for external help. The method of implementation, however, must be improved to help the organisation to ease the burden on the organisations. Overall, the self-regulation of sports organisations cannot continue the way that it has, and in some instances still is. National governments must continue to adopt and implement sports governance codes and enforce it upon their national sport. Can educate themselves, and the best way to do this by learning from this study the issues that the organisations can experience on the journey, but also the resources that the organisations need on the adoption process. It's necessary to state that the structure, culture of sports organisations changes from country to country. However, countries who adopt the same governance system as we do here in Ireland can learn directly from this study, perhaps some other European countries. I mentioned a little bit about culture earlier on in the presentation and what it used to look like in Ireland. I asked the organisations in the study about their culture, and 64% of them stated that their organisational culture has changed as a result of the adoption of the CVC governance code. But to find out more about that, you're going to have to stay tuned and wait until you see me the next time. So that's all from me, guys. If you'd like to get in touch, please do using the following platforms, and best of luck to everyone else presenting today.